Hi, thanks for tuning in. Today is the 29th of May, 2022. Make sure to go to my website, www.susanmealing.com, the same as www.ladydorybell.com. Make sure to subscribe to my official YouTube channel, as well as like my official YouTube videos. And if you're going to leave a comment, make sure to have etiquette and respect. Please do also share the links to my official YouTube videos. And on my website, www.susanmealing.com, which is the same as www.ladydorybell.com, make sure to go to my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, as well as look through my book section as to the links to purchase my books through Amazon. So today, being the 29th of May, 2022, earlier in the week, there was the situation regarding Uvalde, Texas. During this week, and it is the upcoming day tomorrow for Memorial Day. And the aspects as to Memorial Day, the city of San Antonio being nearby the area of Uvalde, Texas, there is the known factor for those who are in the area that San Antonio is also known as Military City, USA. In my childhood, way back when I was in 8th grade, I had brought forward the situation to Governor Christine Todd Whitman when I had earned the way to meet Governor Christine Todd Whitman, the governor of New Jersey, because I had created an oceanic poster of a before and after as to a potential way to clean up the waters, because a lot of situations were occurring during the time frames, which if there are images as to what was regarding what I had created with pastels, there is some plausibility as to certain aspects of the oceanic waters along the East Coast for certain references. Now, my question to Governor Christine Todd Whitman had to do with the situations regarding my friend at the time, Kelly Gann. Her mom had worked at the only mental health institution in the state of New Jersey at the time. And I was concerned about the mental health situation because of, well, I was growing up with my biological mother and my biological father and my biological sister. And it was known as to the situations that I was dealing with by that point in time. And obviously the governor's office would know various individuals regarding DIFUS, or in other areas it's known as Child Protective Services. I, being myself, during that particular field trip to the governor's office because of earning it, I had spoken with several individuals both before and after meeting with Governor Christine Todd Whitman. I have written more so than discussed about that particular point in time, where a bunch of the individuals I had gone to the governor's office with had complained because they didn't get the time with Governor Christine Todd Whitman the way I had. And the situations were as the situations were during that particular point in time. Now, when you take in consideration that I have brought up several factors throughout the time frame, such as how I had been invited to attend Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment. Those who know how military aspects are regarding certain types of schools in that conjunction, if you are invited to attend, that translates to you fill out the paperwork, you go through the motions, but you're already accepted, because you're not going to be invited to a certain type of school if you haven't already been accepted. Those who know about colleges and those particular types of scouting situations, that could be a possible way to take that into consideration. So, I'd been invited to attend Marine and Science Technology School. The situations from Old Tenet Presbyterian Church, as well as Asher Holmes Elementary School and Marlboro Middle School, were known by that point in time. It was also known in reference to several other factors, such as my babysitter and my babysitter's husband, and those combined situations, such as my grandpa Gavitt, to a degree, though my buckung and my buckpoo, because obviously, because of my biological sister being the way she had been, it was extremely easy for quite a few people to do the background check at that particular point in time. So as my biological sister had complained about all the stuff that I was working on, that informed the individuals as to those particular factors about those details that comes with getting a background check completed in certain references. Then with my biological mother working in information technology, engineering and software aspects in reference to Prudential, well, Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment, to the conjunction of the knowledge during my childhood going out to the beach each and every year, and the knowledge that I was one of the children who was elated to go to the beach in comparison to other children who just kind of went there and they'd stand along the shoreline in comparison. So it was fairly easy to find my camp counselors during that time frame and ask about how I was about the water, and so on and so forth. Same thing in regards to 5th grade. That would be very easy for those individuals for those clarifications. And then other factors such as, again, Old Tenet Presbyterian Church, and those situations regarding the individuals with the black suits and white button-down shirts with the black ties, among a few other situations. So then it would easily be capable to essentially in some ways keep track of, to a degree, as to my progress despite the situations as to mast. Because obviously with individuals showing up to the house in New Jersey telling my biological mother and biological father to let it go, it was over, well, those who have met my biological mother, biological father, and biological sister understand those particular references. Now, being moved to Illinois, and that was in the year 1998, certain factors that had been brought up, such as the knowledge regarding 2nd grade as to sight in those references, well, Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment might have had a smidgen of a, what is the word, interest in that reference. And if not just them, a few others, because it was known regarding Old Tenet Presbyterian Church to the older congregants and a few others. Then there is the additional part of my confirmation electives as to the massive difference between the rest of my confirmation class to Presbyterian Church USA because of the way the paperwork was done and needed to be done, as I would guesstimate. With that conjunction of spending 2.5 years at St. John Vianney High School, which is a Catholic high school, and then having been moved in 1998 to Illinois, and those particular factors that the San Antonio pagan community would be capable to take in consideration as to how certain factors went in Illinois, because of my biological sister, as the state of Texas would be capable to take into consideration. Because the irony of ironies, my biological sister didn't seem to put the math together that the problems she was dealing with had to do with the fact that she had run her mouth about me. And so when people found out the truth as to me, then they were upset. And so when she stopped talking about me at that point in time, then they were even more upset because they wanted to know why. And so she dealt with a lot of stuff in New Jersey because of the way she had been in Asher Holmes Elementary School. What they didn't understand was she could not blame things on me wrongly because she had to take accountability for her stupidity because that was her responsibility. And while she had made the choices that Illinois would be capable to recognize, similarly to the state of Texas being capable to recognize those particular factors as to how it was brought up regarding when I had acknowledged to my biological mother and my biological father as to the situations in reference to Governor Christine Todd Whitman and that aspect. And then 1999, I went to go and found out I was graduating a semester early in comparison to a year early, which I was supposed to graduate a year early when I was in New Jersey. I had worked very much diligently in Illinois because when I had been moved from New Jersey to Illinois, they had said I was most likely going to graduate on time only if certain situations, so that was where I went to summer school and additionally went to McHenry County College, and I did everything to graduate a year early as best as I could. When I had understood I couldn't, I wanted to graduate as early as I possibly could, which turned out instead of 1 to 1.5 years of the time frame, because that's just the way it was, I graduated by technicalities a year early from what my biological mother and biological father had tried to have occur. So by technicalities, I still graduated a year early instead of the situations that were occurring, though because of the time frame of the year of 2000, I had only graduated a semester early, which I can acknowledge I'm quite upset with myself because I had my requirements that I set for myself. And that's just how it is. So while, yes, okay, there was an additional amount of time that was added because my biological mother and biological father were as dependent as they were in those particular references, I still have my own standards. And so, yes, I graduated a semester early despite the 1.5 years, 2 years of extra situations, because of what my personal standards were and remain. I am as I am. You can see that in reference to how I earned 26 scuba diving certifications in less than a 12-month time period, and it being enough work to actually have earned 2.5 scuba diver instructor licenses if I had wanted to go that route. Nonetheless, you could also see that in reference to my confirmation volunteer hours, as well as the situations regarding the supposed to be consenting adult lifestyle community and the dominant mentor program as to my elective schedule that I scheduled for myself. So I tend to be a bit stubborn when it comes to my work. And so I dealt with a bunch of situations because how dare I have asked Governor Christine Todd Whitman the question I wanted to ask. Because for those who didn't know, though could probably figure out, I got in trouble because I asked what I wanted to ask instead. And so those who would know my biological mother and my biological father in the time frame of around September or October, when I was preparing to go with the recruiter as far as the Army is concerned, my biological mother and biological father were informed that I did not ask what they wanted because I knew what was more important. And when that occurred, well, they had spoken with the recruiter and informed the recruiter, which is why my paperwork as to my Army paperwork, having that recruiter, not the individual whose name is on my paperwork, my actual recruiter, he had been informed of. He had known. Same thing with the master sergeant and a few other individuals that were in that recruiter station. So, while yes, that particular name is one of the recruiters that were in the recruiter station, that individual was not my actual recruiter at all. If I remember correctly, that male had lighter complexion and a bald head, in compared to who my recruiter was, who was about 6 to 8 inches taller than him, broader shoulders, a brunette in comparison to bald, a hairstyle that would be more similar to, I think, Tom Cruise as far as a hairstyle in comparison, and he had a bit of a tan in comparison to the complexion of the individual whose name is on my paperwork, which was not my recruiter at all in any capacity. So, just for that clarification, I believe the name I read was Ratcliffe, and Ratcliffe was not my recruiter. I had only met him at the recruiter station towards the end of the time frame that I was involved with that recruitment station. So mainly I spoke with, I can't remember his name, but the tall brunette with broader shoulders. In comparison to that individual, again, I only met him, I think maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks before I had actually shipped out to basic training. If I recall correctly, the first time I actually met him was when I was being taken out to the MEP station as far as my ASVAB and those factors in comparison. So it's a bit confusing in reference to why his name would be on my paperwork. However, I guess maybe because of the MEP station in comparison to the recruitment station, I'm not certain. So in those references for that particular clarification as to what was discussed, not between Ratcliffe and I, my actual recruiter. So that truth is as that truth is, and capable to be found as to the individuals in that particular recruiter office, instead of what might have been assumed in that particular thought process, which I wouldn't know, though that is as it is. Nonetheless, I had been for lack of a better word, inquisitive as a child, and I had read a lot of books, and so I made sure to take in consideration several factors. And while I had to go in for an evaluation because of how I had explained things to the recruiter as far as when I was in 2nd grade, and so the recruiter that I had been speaking with had needed that clarification because of what I had brought forward in reference to what I had wanted to do because of what I had seen. So that recruiter had wanted to have the understanding in reference to not only that, though, Old Tenet Presbyterian Church, because I had explained the factors as to that cellar that was put in and the reality of what was noticed, in conjunction to I had explained to that recruiter as to the situations as to Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment. So that recruiter had wanted to make sure that I was clear, and had found out not only was I clear, a few other situations in reference to a few sight aspects and being capable to pick up on energetic portions at that particular point in time. And so that recruiter and I had discussed, and so my clarifications regarding my paperwork, because anybody who has had a 17-year-old that went through a recruiter office that actually lived with them in comparison to other factors, such as 2018, there is the knowledge that you're going to have a lot of discussions, though that also requires the paperwork being signed immediately the way I had in reference to my son when he was 17 years old. And in comparison to that, my biological mother and my biological father were constantly visited by that recruiter. And what it basically was is they, specifically my biological mother, she was getting attention. And so because she was getting attention, it was any excuse to do that way. And anybody who's met my biological mother and or my biological father, you have that knowledge. And so in those particular situations as to how that actually was, my paperwork could have been signed well before, however, because essentially the recruiter had wanted to make sure well, those who met my biological mother most specifically, you might be capable to understand why that particular recruiter, after having run my background check, wanted to make sure. Because he had to deal with my biological mother and my biological father and my biological sister on a 2 to 3 times a week basis. And so he wanted to make sure. That's what was explained to me as to certain factors that I dealt with. And I just kind of, well, I understand that. I do. Mainly because I've been living with them as a child, and I've brought this forward a whole bunch of times. So I'm not really a fan per se. However, I understand. And anybody who's met my biological mother and or biological father and biological sister, you'd have that understanding as to why yeah. So then there's, 2019 and 2020 into 2021. And so I had dealt with some stuff after my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000 when I was in basic training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I woke up in the state of Texas. And I woke up at Fort Sam Houston, which there is a large veteran community throughout the Midwest and South of the United States of America. So whatever the particular pop culture in regards of New Jersey to people in Illinois, well, that recruiter I had might have been a smidgen confused because of whatever the pop culture reference was in 1998 and 1999. Possibly into the 2000s, though in 2000s I was usually asked about the Jersey Shore, and so I thought they were talking about swimming. That's what I thought. However, I suppose I can make a joke because water towers in the general areas, I haven't ever stood how anybody ever believed that those water towers that are on those spokes could ever actually be water towers for water. I've had that issue since I was a child. I haven't ever understood how that could ever hold enough water for everybody in any city area. My thought was, well, we have pipes that go underneath the house, so just gonna throw this out there. I see these electrical lines. Is that the type of water that's in that water tower? Is electrical stuff in comparison? Because I know that the pipes that go to the house go underneath the ground. And I'm fairly certain that well on the side of the house is in the ground, not on the ground. Thanks, George Carlin. Because that's just kind of the fact that a well is in the ground and not on the ground like an above ground pool. However, those towers, those water towers, supposedly, that, you know, the circular shape, think of like those who know Animaniacs and the cartoon where they have the Animaniacs, Yakko, Wacko, and Dot living in the water tower. Well, that kind of was the best way I saw it as a child when Animaniacs came out, and I was like, so if Animaniacs, so, you know, I bet I get along with Dot. I totally would get along with Dot. I really like Dot. Although Yakko and Wacko seem cool to hang out with, but I'm totally so, like, I could totally get along with Dot. Totally could. We actually get along in comparison to some of these other whatevers. My opinion. However, looking at the electrical lines and then seeing the water towers, well, I gave a whole bunch of warnings as best as I could, and that's literally... that is pop culture by technicalities. Now I have that song in my head because that's... And I can make the joke, my scuba diving colors, as well as my supposed to be consenting adult lifestyle colors, are black and white. So I can make that joke as well, because why not? And so so I really liked Animaniacs. I can make reference jokes at this point in time. So there's like the Brain and Pinky, and I can use a combination as to 9 Lives books regarding that particular factor. And then, what was it? What was Snappy, the squirrel or whatever? And there's a few references in the Austin area. As well as the Dallas area. And then, you know, Yakko and Wacko, well, there's a few references there. Then there's the Good Feathers. There's a few references there. And the Blue Jay, I remember the Blue Jay as far as the Good Feathers, as far that was a funny episode, actually, and because I am as I was. Well, you know, scientifically, you can't do that right now because there's a particular species situation. You happen to be of that particular species because I'm that person. So, So what I listened to regarding an interview between Joe Rogan and Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist, well, that was me as a child, regarding quite a few things when he had said that he had reviewed certain space type movies. So, and it's true. So, in reference to the Uvalde, Texas situation, those particular factors as to the amount of time between the year of 2000 through 2013, essentially, as to what I had brought forward in multiple ways, in person, face-to-face in person, online through social media postings, and through emails in conjunction to phone calls. And that's in reference to the after effects of my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000 and those aspects. That's in reference to my daughter's situation and my son. And while I had more so in person, face-to-face in person, about scuba diving in reference to words, there are the pictures that I posted in regards of my scuba diving. So while I had actually spoken with people in person, face-to-face in person, utilizing words, obviously, because that's how you speak, that would be in the year 2009 into 2010, mainly in comparison to just talking about my scuba diving on the surface level, not in reference to in-depth. I had the only in-depth aspect had to do with the poofy fish situation, because I was dealing with what I was dealing with, and instead of any of those people ever asking me about my scuba diving in depth, that was just the way it went. And since I'm a mom and I tend to take care of responsibilities as best as I can, well, I took care of the responsibilities as best as I can. So having brought up the poofy fish, that was a responsibility. The other aspects as to my scuba diving and my scuba diving style has nothing to do, well, it does, but concerns at those times in comparison to the way situations went. Hypothetically, so in reference to my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, on my website, www.susanmealing.com, which is the same as www.ladydoribell.com. And also to my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, there is also the reference as to my books. And so in Finding a Silver Lining, which you can find the link through my website to Amazon, so the situations that I had brought forward repeatedly throughout various states. So you have me bringing this up in the state of New Jersey, as well as New York and Pennsylvania. You had me bringing this up in the state of Illinois. You had me bringing this up in the state of Texas. You had me bringing this up in the state of Oklahoma twice because of during basic training, as well as afterwards regarding my ex-in-laws. You had where I brought this up online, as well as those references to in-person. So this was a continuous situation that people's opinions were as people's opinions were as to those factors. And while other people, whatever their opinions were at the time, well, in the year of 2013, I had wound up in Washington State after what occurred between the year of 2000 into 2013, and those situations. And then I began my Medal of Honor art project after having published some of my books while working on other books. I had begun my website mainly as www.susanmealing.com because I wasn't at the point of putting the reference to my name of www.ladydorybell.com because of my choice. And so while I did not ever hide, those individuals who knew me in person, face to face in person at events, knew that I had acknowledged my name as well as the original Facebook account of mine in the conjunction to my original FetLife account, which you can verify to the writings as to what I brought forward. While some people in the supposed to be consenting adult lifestyle scene might not have liked certain things brought forward, such as the Dominant Mentor program, that doesn't change the facts, that the facts are the facts. And while some may have thought it as a game in comparison to respecting life in reality, those particular situations when I said no to being an ambassador because of what I was dealing with and what I was working on at that point in time, because there was my scuba diving, I already had informed people I was going to be authoring books, and I didn't want to deal with certain things. Additionally, because of the facts in reference to my scuba diving and those situations, I also additionally was not willing to be a part of certain things because of what I knew. And that would be after this particular meeting in the year of 2011 was after one particular situation in Irving before a few others. So in that particular situation as to later on, among a few other situations, the reality of when someone says no, because I had the right and still have the right to say no, that's the facts. And so in reference to that particular situation, it was brought up to me in the Dallas area of the Dominant Mentor program that it wasn't known whether or not there'd be enough electives for me to be capable to graduate, which when I had informed him as to the amount of electives I actually had completed, that was the way the situation went. And so the Austin area as to the state of Texas apparently would have more of a knowledge base in regards of that difference between the Dominant Mentor program in Austin compared to the Dominant Mentor program in Dallas and the connections thereof to those factors. And so going in reference to the Uvalde, Texas situation as to what had been brought forward in the multitude of ways, in the multitude of areas, if people had actually paid attention time and time again in the correct capacities, despite the fringe side aspects, sometimes those fringe areas have far more information than you would ever find in the normal areas to look. And so in that particular reference, the facts of. So 2013 through 2018, I had already put forward as far as the various aspects of my books and working on my Medal of Honor art project and the trips as to among what else I was personally dealing with. And so those situations, as far as how that was concerned, to those factors and the permissions that would be needed from me. And in the advanced part, you'd actually have to have spoken with me in person, face to face in person beforehand, because of what I had to deal with. due to those particular hypotheticals. And so in regards of, I mean, there's a pattern of behavior for those who wouldn't know. So there is the modern day book that I had authored. For those who wouldn't have ever thought about the reality, well, there's my scuba diving. And then there's Irving in 2011. And so because of that hypothetical regarding individuals that during my Medal of Honor art project trips. So, permission from me, really important. It's really, really important because of the facts. And so there's a situation regarding Uvalde, Texas. And in the year of 2019, I returned back to the state of Texas in another attempt, because my pattern of behavior is usually to bring forward certain things if I can't handle it on my own. And so if I can handle it on my own, I just go and handle it. If I need assistance and or some individual of certain capacities for something, depending on the situation, I will go and make attempts to actually do so. If I know that there's something that needs to be checked on, I tend to do that as well. I am a mom. And so there are those factors. So I returned back to the state of Texas in the year 2019, and I made attempt after attempt after attempt after attempt. In comparison to 2000 through 2013, it was just from 2019 through 2021, which I made attempts, as you can go to my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, through my website, www.susanmealing.com, which is the same as www.ladydorybell.com. And so those particular situations as to the year of 2019 and all of those attempts that I made to speak with various individuals and the various attempts I made as to stopping by certain locations and the various attempts I made in requests of meetings, such as with Governor Greg Abbott at the time frame, because I could see what was coming at that point in time. So instead, then there was the year of 2020 and how that went. And you can look at my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, on my website, www.susanmealing.com, which is the same as www.ladydorybell.com. Just as similarly as you can go to my original FetLife account and read through the different forum areas, as well as to my writings at those times, so on and so forth, as to what I had noticed and brought forward time and time and time again. So by all technicalities, from the late 1980s through the 1990s, into the 2000s and the 2010s, and then beginning in the 2020s, I have brought forward quite a few alerts. And while individuals have had whatever opinions they have had, the facts are the facts, as far as that's concerned. And so while people have been upset about the LGBTQP transgender surgeries, has anybody ever paid attention to how easy it is-ish? I mean, there's a lot of paperwork for people who wouldn't have certain issues, but nonetheless, the paperwork of changing a name legally and those particular factors as to the child situation regarding biological adults and those problems such as. So I don't know whether or not individuals have in the law enforcement areas ever thought about that or paid attention to that, Or maybe they didn't really think much about it because they thought only as to the alias name in comparison, or both. I don't know. I don't know what law enforcement took in consideration because of the requirement to end identity theft, which is the same as ending stolen valor, because of those particular factors that would be considered as severely problematic, obviously. And so while I know I'm not the only person who has dealt with certain situations, such as my biological mother and biological father and biological sister, I know the fact I'm not the only person who dealt with something such as Baptist Camp Lebanon. And I am not the only individual who has dealt with certain sorts of situations, such as, the civilian recreational scuba diver sector compared to lazy scuba divers because of what the choice of words are. So I was informed in reference to International Scuba that they considered scuba diving as recreational scuba diving. Scuba Toys had informed me that they consider their scuba diving as lazy scuba diving. Individuals throughout the state of Texas would be capable to take in consideration which of the two as to the if factors. In comparison, my style of scuba diving is not either one of those, obviously with the proof as to those particular factors. Now, I did make attempts in regards of 2019, went directly to, unlike some individuals, and not only did I do that in 2019, in 2020 I made one final attempt regarding International Scuba. However, they didn't have the time to meet at those particular points. So I went on my way, still doing my own thing. And so, because if it was important for me to be spoken with, then I'd be contacted and asked. And since I don't like being as certain types of people, I make sure to make attempts. And so when I reach out, which I have, that is up to the other individual or individuals to make their what have you. So the example is I had contacted my biological mother and biological father. Their job was to, if they wanted to speak with me in person, face to face in person, their job was to ask me to arrange that to occur. Similarly, having stopped by the scuba diving areas and other factors of, that's their job. If they wanted to speak with me, well then they could contact me and arrange with me a schedule to occur. It's no different than my house in San Antonio or my house in Carrollton, where it was mandatory that if you wanted to speak with me, you would inform me of what would be a possibility for a schedule in comparison to what some people have thought as to how some people do things. So in Illinois, people just go over one another's house, and I don't know why. I didn't particularly like that. In New Jersey, you didn't do that. If you showed up to somebody's house in New Jersey without being invited, and it wouldn't matter if you were even blood family. My biological father's sister did this, and she dealt with that. So you don't just roll up on somebody from New Jersey. So I don't know what people's references regarding New Jerseyans are, but you don't just show up. You let it be known ahead of time, unless it's a public location. You don't just roll up and just, hey, what's going on? Let's hang out. That's not how that goes. It's not a southern location. It's not a Midwestern location. You get permission. That's how that goes. And so while I was called snobby in reference to the city of Austin, because in the year 2010 and 2011, mainly what I was informed had to do with because I was wearing corsets. Though it was as it was, I also wouldn't allow that sort of stuff to happen. You just don't do that. You don't know somebody else's life. You don't know what they're dealing with. You don't have the right to do so. And people who do so in New Jersey, well, they learn to make an appointment with the individual. So unless it's a business where the business is at a storefront and so on and so forth, in comparison, you don't just roll up. That's not how that goes. Just because we can wave, there are certain factors. So unless you see them outside, that's different than inviting yourself into someone's location. That's not the way that goes. That doesn't go very well. And from what I can remember as far as New Jersey is concerned. So, but there were all these people that in Illinois had a problem when I had told them in high school, don't just show up to my house. If you do, you're gonna deal with what occurs, and that's just how it is. And so like the cheerleaders were upset by that. They thought that they could just show up to anybody's house, and I said, no, you will be in trouble for that. And they thought because of however they were raised, and then at the same time, we know how people are from New Jersey. Well, if you do have people are from New Jersey, you know you don't just roll up to somebody's house and think that everything's gonna be all hunky-dory, because if you do that and you don't, you just don't do that. The other aspect is if you roll up to a location that you know someone from New Jersey is in, you better pay your damn respects, and that translates to you going directly up to the individual and you being respectful with etiquette, because if you roll up to a location that you know somebody from New Jersey's at and you once knew them in person, face to face in person, if you don't give them the respect that they are due, well, you know, I mean, people have said they know how people from New Jersey are. I don't know what references they've had. The only reference I've had as to what they were talking about has to do with the Jersey Shore. And no, that's like kindergarten. So I don't know what reference they have. But you just don't do that. You know, you know, and that's it's just kind of the thing. Especially you don't roll up to there's certain things when it comes to that, which is as it is. However, the stereotype is, you know, which I would guess. So I was listening to Fox News the other day, and I heard Mike Pompeo on, I think it was Fox Nation, and he was talking about a few things that were going on. And he, if I remember reading correctly, he's from New Jersey. And so I would guesstimate he would understand that. You don't just, if you do them in person, face to face in person, there is a difference. It's one thing if you heard about somebody being somewhere. And there's certain respect aspects of. However, that's very different than knowing somebody in person, face to face in person, and just being like, so, you know, stirring up needless drama in that capacity, because you don't do that Illinois thing, and you don't do that. You just, no, there's, Chicago understands that. The rest of Illinois, not so much. That I would guesstimate the majority of issues in Chicago, probably certain similarities have to do with the ones that travel to the area in comparison, because of the way certain factors are as to, well, there are those who know Crystal Lake, Illinois, so you have that to understand. Nonetheless, so there's Miss Michelle regarding President of the United States of America 44, Barack Obama, who had brought up that the time frame of the week regarding the Uvalde shooting has to be a 1 year time frame from George Floyd, and that particular factor. Today, President of the United States of America 46, Joe Biden, and Miss Jill went out to the state of Texas in those references. And so Miss Michelle, having been from Chicago, if I remember reading correctly, there are certain factors of truth in those regards. And so if in regards of the modern day book, in my book section regarding my website, www.susanmealing.com, also the same as www.ladydorybell.com, there are the realities in reference to the if factor regarding quite a few things, because there's obviously the difference between law enforcement, obviously, as to my Medal of Honor art project stuff, is as it is in comparison to certain other factors. There's also, the difference between civilians who think it's a YOLO situation compared to law enforcement in reference to certain factors as to, because my Medal of Honor art project artwork would obviously be different. And so individuals as to, the Miller family who wouldn't have any information except for what they learned from Mike, Anna, and Patricia, that would be all they'd be allowed to know. And so, since 44 as to the time frame of the year 2008, that reference, those factors. Yeah. And so, that Miller situation regarding Zach Miller and Exit 200, and whatever he was informed of in regards of my biological sister and my biological mother and my biological father, as to possibly, how people are from New Jersey, similarly to Illinois types. So then there's that as to, so anyway, I made attempts to give warnings for quite a few situations. And so, so there's these factors as to McCoy Elementary School, and Carrollton Farmers Branch Independent School District. And then my scuba diving in that capacity, my ex-in-laws and those particular situations, not that I'm friends with her, I just spoke with her, my ex-sister-in-law, Susie Marie Nichols Lopez, during the initial times of knowing her, compared to her remarried name of Sweetie or Sweeney, because of, friend Lee, different aspect. And so those situations as to my daughter and my son, those factors, because Grandpa Nichols warned Susie to move out of the area in comparison to staying with Grandma Nichols and that close, what have you, because of the way certain situations were. And I could easily see the wishful thoughts in certain references as to that, and well, depending on viewpoints, that just, no. It would have been best if it had been how I had arranged it in comparison, because that was what Grandpa Nichols had warned about when it came to when I had moved from San Antonio to Carrollton. Grandpa Nichols warned every one of my ex-in-laws, do not overstep her lines, because Grandpa Nichols knew people from New Jersey. And I don't know what the reference point would be, that other pop culture stuff, though there is that. And so I made attempts regarding these particular culmination of events from before the year of 2019, in the year of 2019, through the year of 2021, regarding the state of Texas. When it got to a certain point, I knew I had to take care of other things, and while yes, I was going, if I had not had certain issues to get the transfer, I would have been back to run for governor of the state of Texas. However, I had other things to take care of and apparently deal with. And so since that wasn't handled in the correct capacities, because I know myself, I know what I've been working on in comparison, and the need to get out to the East Coast, because while whatever opinions in reference to my biological mother, biological father, and biological sister, well, they made the choices that they made. And so on the 20-year memorial, well, I have been making multiple attempts to get out to where I was born and raised. And so while they made the decisions that they made in regards of after the attacks on the 11th of September 2001, well, if they thought that I would want to be around them on the 20-year memorial, I don't know why they would, especially after the prior aspects. That would be something regarding that mental health awareness situation in a large way, because why would I ever want to see them in regards of the 20-year memorial as to that particular factor? Because if they thought that that would be a good idea, because most likely I would guesstimate the Millers would do the political situation. And if that's the case, no, I don't do that sort of stuff. Though it's a good thing if that hypothetical were to be, because they have the reference of what happened in the basement chapel at Fort Sam Houston. Which I do have to acknowledge, there are probably some people that I have known in person, face to face in person, who they actually might have preferred except I am as I am, and I do what I can to not have to deal with that sort of stuff, because, well, it just wouldn't have, it wouldn't have been as fluffy. In that reference, if that's the hypothetical, though that shows in that reference. Because if that happened to be regarding the Millers, specifically associated to that Zach Miller, which I didn't get to know him in person, face to face in person. I didn't speak with him except for 2 or 3 times in person, face to face in person. So there is that reality. And so when you take in consideration the Uvalde, Texas factor and the combined situations, which I made attempts to bring these factors forward time and time again, there are the realities as to possibly even the terminology I recently came up with, the forensic social media review or report, forensic social media or forensic online review, something along that, which I would guesstimate that guy Mike Pompeo That might actually be something for consideration because of quite a few factors, I would guesstimate, since he was apparently in the CIA. He might know a thing or two. He would know, obviously. In comparison, nonetheless. The situations regarding the Uvalde, Texas situation, and those factors were brought forward in that time frame. So you have a prior official YouTube video of mine. Subscribe to my official channel, as well as share the links to my official YouTube video. In one of the lectures I had given, the reference to not just the review of social media, but also the reference to what is the normalcy of video games, computer games. I refer to prior news reports from the 1980s and 1990s, as well as movies, music, so on, and that review. And then the prescriptions. And then the reality of individuals who have been on prescriptions. So when I was growing up in New Jersey, I knew a lot of people who were prescribed prescriptions, and if they were capable to have children, what did the genetic situation become? As to not just in reference to delivering children and raising them, though the after time frame up. And so I don't know how long prescription medications have been utilized. However, in reference to something such as Ritalin, for one example, because I knew a lot of people who were on Ritalin. Those reviews as to that, and what would be the reference of those who were prescribed Ritalin but played certain types of video games, and those situations to take in consideration of a review because of the reality. And whether taking the circumstances to think about when it comes to the surrounding factors, who was in this individual's life, who was, and not just in person, face-to-face in person, though also online. What were the aspects of to that type of a review? Because especially now, you have social media and that, but what else was to take in consideration? Because the factors that have been brought forward in various ways, as much as I have made attempts to, you have the time from, I will give a shortened, you have the 1980s into the 1990s in the overall way of multiple areas, into the 2000s and 2010s and now 2020s. In reference to the state of New Jersey, you have the time frame from the late 1980s to 1998. In Illinois, you have the time frame of 1998 to 2000. In the Army, in a combined way, you have 1999 through, currently in 2022, in the varying ways, depending on. In reference to the state of Texas, you have from the year 2000 through 2013, and then 2019 through 2021, in reference to the in-person, face-to-face, in-person ways. Then in regards of, and this is my particular references, because obviously in New Jersey and Illinois, I wasn't on social media. And in reference to the Army, I wasn't on social media. In reference to having been invited to attend Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment, I was not on social media. When I was invited to attend Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment, I didn't even have an email yet. It wouldn't be for another 2 years before I'd actually have an email. for that consideration. So I probably stuck out like a sore thumb to anybody that was involved with technology when you think about it. As far as the combined factors of, nonetheless, when you really take that in consideration, I probably did. Nonetheless, then you have the time frame ish, because it was more my books at the time in comparison to the end writing on a social media way, the same factor way as to from 2009 through 2013 mainly. But you have certain in-person, face-to-face in-person discussions, which in Washington State, mainly from about 2015, 2016 through 2018 or 19, that's kind of similar to my childhood-ish in New Jersey, around 1984, 1985 to around 1988, 1989-ish, to a degree, and some factors as to smaller questions at certain times to when reviewing that now in 2022. So then, but you also have 2019 through 2021. And 2019 through 2021 would be kind of a condensed version of the 1980s through 2013 to review, despite the different circumstances I brought forward, especially when you take in consideration my journal blog, The Ornery PSA. And so in 2022, in the month of May, earlier this week, as to the Uvalde, Texas shooting, these are situations that have had a multitude of circumstances to pay attention to. It's not as simple as 1, 2, or 3 different things. There's more than that. The neurology field knows that the brain works differently per individual. And so depending on various combinations depends on the situations. And so I had discussed in the year of 2012 what was going on in reference to my daughter and my son and I. And there was Fort Sam Houston. So I already had the situation in 2008 regarding in Major General Gilman's office as to the Bronze Star aspects. And then later in 2012, I had explained, but also put in writing, the situations because of what started referencing McCoy Elementary School in Carrollton, Texas, and any associated needless problems because of my biological sister and that abomination of a marriage, in my opinion, to Zach Miller, as to those factors, as to what my son, my daughter, and I dealt with needlessly because of that type. Those situations, as per the proof, hypothetically, would be capable to be found as per. Now, in those references, I dealt with disarming my daughter on Fort Sam Houston after she had disarmed an MP. I had informed people about this. If you were to have a fluffy version of a viewpoint because of the way everything went, it'd be like a Scooby-Doo chase because of the way the hallways are and a few other factors. Not making light of it, just a reference point. And having to jump on top of my own daughter, disarm after having pushed my son to safety, to then jump on my daughter to disarm her from the firearm that she had taken out of the holster from an MP to then hand over to the MP after pinning my own daughter down. So that way, all of the people in the emergency room at Fort Sam Houston were capable to be safe. And the way that particular situation went, you have the Uvalde, Texas situation. Now, I made the choice to jump and do as I did, despite the fact of. So I made sure my son wouldn't have to see that as best as I could make sure he didn't have to see that. And I made sure that as best as possible regarding everybody else that was in that emergency room didn't have to deal with it. I jumped on top of my daughter. I disarmed my own daughter. I took that firearm she had in her hand, and then while holding her down, having handed the pistol while holding the actual barrel part, as whichever soldier on Fort Sam Houston had taken the pistol, and then the medical situation regarding my daughter. What happened regarding Uvalde, Texas? Because I didn't graduate basic training. I didn't go to AIT. And I dealt with a few individuals, such as that Zach Miller at exit 200, who thought that that was the halfway mark between San Marcos and Carrollton, Texas, who thought that he knew better, similar to those three little teenagers in my backyard at my house in San Antonio in the year 2003, how they thought that they knew better in comparison to the reality. Similar to how my biological sister, she thought she knew she could handle being a psychologist in forensics after she knew I worked at ISR on Fort Sam Houston at a very small amount of time nonetheless. So I listened to Vigilance Elite, and that particular male had informed through his videos and interviews discussing how in the civilian sector, not in federal level of law enforcement, because they deal with the civilian in multiple sectors. So in the CIA and the FBI and Homeland Security and whichever branches of in the federal level compared to the local, not necessarily state, but local level. So you have in this reference as to that factor where Zach Miller had an issue taking his head cover off and his sunglasses off because he had whatever opinion of, which in some ways probably similar to a certain reference of someone I was engaged to, as to when he was explaining about the difference as far as his mom and his dad, probably certain similarities, though a difference. He went into the Army. In comparison, nothing wrong with local law enforcement at all. They're important, they're needed. However, when you take in consideration the Uvalde, Texas situation, in 2012, when I was asked, so this is the way this went, after I had handed the barrel, holding the barrel while whoever grabbed the butt end of the gun, the guys from Vigilance Elite would be capable to clarify, same thing with Mike Pompeo, would be capable to clarify whether or not that was the safest way for me to return the pistol, despite not being capable to see who took it. Nonetheless, the soldiers came in regards of after I had her pinned down and she wasn't capable to cause any more problems, they took her to the location in the emergency room to then get the medical treatment that was necessary. When I was asked by one of the doctors, first there was what was it? He had made a comment in regards to what I did referencing my son James. And it was, well, he didn't need to see that, it's kind of common sense My son, he already knows what's going on regarding his sister, so, he doesn't need to see that as far as that particular if factor. And then even still, depending on the bullets regarding that particular pistol, the safety, common sense. However, the reality is I didn't want the guys who had been sent overseas, if I could prevent it, or at the very minimum delay it, guys who had been sent overseas, as far as Iraq and Afghanistan, they didn't need to deal with that. Not in any offense to the situation, because, of course I care about my daughter and I care about my son, and I'm very much about life. Though individuals who had been overseas, they know what the rules of engagement are. They know as far as how the situations were over there. And so fast forward though, after my daughter was put in Laurel Ridge in San Antonio for the time frame of, and then all of the appointments regarding that before the other situations, as best as I could take care of. As a single mom, the only living parent that my son and my daughter had, that sort of stuff. So at the NICS unit, after this situation by several months, there were 2 civilian sector area, because they deal with civilians in comparison to the military, though only when military goes in the area of, there is that. So they had a civilian that was in their custody at that time. These 2 law enforcement guys. My daughter is running around, and I've already dealt with quite a few things. I walk over to these 2 police officers, and I informed these police officers what my daughter did at Fort Sam Houston. And these 2 police officers in law enforcement, so the older male shrugged his shoulders and said, yeah, sure, whatever. The younger male, on the other hand, was kind of, well, I'll keep it. Well, less than 5-10 minutes later, despite running around, making sure, doing what I could to keep my daughter away from shit and taking care of my son at the same time, in only a lobby area of this location. So it's not like it's a huge area. It's maybe 30 feet wide and maybe at the deepest, maybe 15 to 20 feet deep at the deepest area of open spots, okay? So it's not large, but there's all of the chairs and everything like that. So I have my son to make sure to take care of. However many times he's had to be in this situation, as best as I can do for him, to keep him taken care of, while at the same time of doing what I can to make sure my daughter's taken care of and keep her safe, though because of the situations regarding the overall. So I've informed these 2 police officers. The older police officer doesn't believe any of that can happen. The younger one is kind of skeptical, and then my daughter goes and reaches to take the unbeliever's firearm. And instead, again, similarly to the MP situation. So now you've got the Uvalde, Texas situation. Now, I knew that on Fort Sam Houston, if there was another MP that had been in the area, my daughter was holding that pistol the way she was, I know what my son and I would have saw. Not stupid in that regard. Instead, I jumped on top, took the firearm away, and handled it myself. What is the difference between that situation compared to in the civilian sector as to what happened in Uvalde? Because whatever the reports are in those references, those situations are what needs to be reviewed as well, in my opinion. Because the reality is, if as what, I think his name is Sean from Vigilance Elite had said, that guys such as him and the ones that he had interviewed, as far as up to the point that I had listened, and watched what I could, he had brought up that civilian law enforcement, well, they didn't want to have the payment of. They wanted to go a different route because of whatever aspects as to a bunch of military background guys have dealt with what they've dealt with as to these situations. Then you have all these bureaucratic situations in conjunction to that. And so this is kind of the important factor when you add how 44, Barack Obama, had brought up the year time frame as to George Floyd and what occurred during the summertime as to the rioting compared to protesting and the situations of. So I've brought forward in regards to, similarly, when I was living in Carrollton, I told my biological sister in Fort Worth, as well as Dallas, they had advertisements for police. If her husband had wanted to be a police officer, then he could go there. And as far as like being on the force in those areas. And her response was that was too dangerous, which was similar regarding to why she felt that she was too good in regards of her college financial debt. That's what she explained. And see, this is the problem when you have these types of people. So if you have a weak male, well, behind him is probably a weak female. It's just the facts. If you have a strong male, most likely you got a strong female behind him. Depending on, you could have a weak male with a strong female behind him. It depends on, but it depends on. Because what is the consideration as to strength? So in regards of Zach Miller to that saying, and you have my biological sister behind him, you got her whispering in his ears as to what would actually be reality. And those sorts of needless problems that get stirred up in that hypothetical. So in 2019, this could have been prevented if people had actually spoken with me because of the stuff that I could bring forward. But when you want to do things similar to what the Vigilance Elite guy had brought up, where you just sit down and watch things and then you think you can figure it out because you think not paying for it or paying a cheaper price or whatever the example is in comparison to paying the price right out front. Well, you're going to pay a price one way or another. And the price that was paid between the time frame of 2019 through 2022 essentially is the Uvalde situation. That's your price. Because now you get to do the review as to these situations, as to what could have actually been worked on, as to what actually could have been discussed, as to what actually could have been reviewed in the correct capacities instead. So that's your price. Your price are all of those children that do not get to grow up because of the situations that could have been handled beforehand. Well, you've got Memorial Day tomorrow. So people know what Memorial Day stands for, depending on. And so I'm more about life. I'm far more about life. It's really important. I believe in life. And so, I know that there's the Biggie Smalls album title of something else, but that's not really what I was referring to when I liked his music. And so in those references as to the individuals that could have actually taken care of a few things the correct way. So the guy from Vigilance Elite, he brought up how they, in the military veterans, have made attempts time and time again, telling enforcement as far as police departments, you need these assistances, you need this help. These are these realities. This is this, this is this, this is this. That guy graduated basic training in AIT and became a Navy SEAL.
I didn't graduate basic training. I didn't go to AIT. So when you have both ends of that particular spectrum, you have the guys who went through basic training, AIT or equivalent of, all of the specialty training, so on and so forth, all the way to someone such as myself. I didn't graduate basic training. I saw this stuff, but I wanted to make an attempt to actually assist. Have these viewpoints, these assessments that can actually be beneficial. And all sorts of guys in between. So that guy being a male, me being a biological him being a biological male, me being a biological female. And then the guys that he's had on his show. And you got the mic drop with the podcast and stuff like that, where they've discussed things. It's a lot of videos to watch and listen to. There is a difference, though, as to the in-person, face-to-face, in-person stuff because of the reality. So when you take in consideration scuba diving, well, that has to be done in person, face-to-face, in person. That's not something that you can watch, obviously. However, in the reference to the Uvalde situation, well, I made the joke back in the day as to, well, I was, born and raised in New Jersey, and I drank the water, whatever you want to consider as water, in New Jersey, and I breathed the air, as to what you consider as air in New Jersey. So, so then there's the irony as to the climate situation, and what do you consider as water? Because then you have Detroit. As far as Detroit, Michigan, Flint, Michigan, and what's been brought forward regarding quite a few situations. So here's the viewpoint. What are you going to choose to do? Because I didn't want those guys having to have to do that if it could be prevented. At the very minimum, if it could be delayed. As far as schools, giving a foundational point for understanding, so there wasn't other factors. Because one of the situations my daughter had was anybody who physically looked as one of the classmates and or the 3 volunteers, she automatically started popping off in class. But that's natural, in my opinion. Really doesn't matter in certain references, because it depends on what that point is. So when you take in consideration as to military guys who have been stationed overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan, among other locations, though, having had to deal with a radicalized ideology. Then comes a different evaluation as to what to review. So, usually in that radicalized ideology, they don't use their own, if I remember correctly, because why would they? And so, you've got my biological mother, biological father, and biological sister, and my ex-in-laws, as well as that Miller abomination, in my opinion, regarding that abomination of a marriage and the time frame shortly thereafter. So, what would be capable to take in consideration as to a year ago in 2000, I thought it was 2020, not 2021, in reference to the George Floyd situation, though people would know better than I would as to that particular speech that 44 had given. And so, some other things to take in consideration as to the importance of specifics as to time, because time and getting that accurate is important as best as possible, right? So, something to consider in addition to a few other factors. Now, the reality regarding the Uvalde situation, again, my condolences, though it could have been prevented. And that's the facts. Because what occurred with my daughter was in the year 2012. This is the year 2022. And so, today is the 29th of May, 2022. Thanks for tuning in to my official YouTube channel. Subscribe to my official YouTube channel and like my official YouTube videos. Make sure to go to my website, www.susanmealing.com. Also the same as www.ladydoribell.com. Have a good day.